since I am not quite as entertaining as the lovely Kyle Paris when it comes to plants. But it's pretty darn cool because you can compare and contrast this life cycle with that of the moss. So the moss is a little bit more primitive, and that's because it has to be tied closely to water. It has to occur in water areas where it's going to have a lot of water. And ferns too, you see a lot of it in moist places, but not quite along the shoreline typically. So what you guys have is a transition here. So instead of extremely primitive where you have both gametophyte haploid generation and sporophyte diploid generation in the same organism at the same time, in the same tube basically, you have a different situation here. So when you look at a fern, you are generally looking at the sporophyte. Now there is at some stage a small amount of gametophyte. We're going to talk about it because it's important, but it's made to be really big. It's not really that big. Okay, you have little baby ones you guys can look at, but you have to use the dissecting scope to see it because it's starting to grow the sporophyte baby out of it. But realistically, we have a different situation here because it's sporophyte dominant and the gametophyte is much, much more reduced than what it was in the moss. So, fern, we have the fronds. If you were to look underneath some of the reproductive fronds, you'd see what we call sori, or sori, whatever you want to call it. Not Surrey, like Surrey Cruise. So people have been asking me about that, apparently. But you can see they're like little bitty dots and they look kind of crusty. They actually have just tons of spores in them. So hopefully nobody's allergic. I think so. If you were to take a microscope and look at them, though, you'd actually see something that would look like this. Okay. So anyway, you know that if you have spores that, and I shouldn't back up, by the way, you know that the sporophyte produces spores, and those spores have to be produced by one process only, and that is, starts with an M, meiosis. And so on the book, you're going to see myospores a lot, and that's what they'll call them, whatever spores, same thing. But just remember, myospores, you're going to have spores through that process. So did the spores just drift away and then become some magical unicorns? No, they have to land and grow. So we call that growth phase, another M word, mitosis. So think about the general, simple life cycle, and don't worry too much about all the details because it's easy. Spores land, they grow. What they grow into, same thing with the moss over there. We have it as a gametophyte, that's what it's called. You have a male region of the gametophyte and a female region of the gametophyte. It's not quite separate structures or separate plants as it was in the moss, but the same names. So let's not get crazy with it. We have the female, which is going to start with, let's see it, archae. So archegonium for the female, that's going to have what gamete? Egg. And then for the male, it's going to be I can't find it. Where are we? There we are, buddy. Antheridium. So that's going to have the sperm. So if we're talking about these gametophytes are growing from the spores, gametophyte is going to produce gametes. So that's the egg and the sperm. They love each other very